Hey everyone, today CLG announced officially their LCS roster for 2022, so I want to talk about that a little bit, how I feel about it. There'll be a more comprehensive kind of projection and understanding of their total roster build. First of all, once I know their academy roster, which I don't at this point, and also once all of the rosters for the entire league have been built in, and I can put it all in context and have preseason power rankings and all of that. But we can put some initial reactions out to these five players and where they're going. And right off the bat, I think I can say I'm pretty happy with what CLG has done here. So their roster is going to be Jenkins, coming over as a free agent from Team Liquid, Contracts, who they presumably have bought out from Evil Geniuses, Palafox, who they would have bought out from FlyQuest, and then Luger and Poom coming over from 100 Thieves Academy, both of whom I believe also would have had to come through a buyout. So there are a bunch of buyouts here, and that might give you a bit of a negative reaction to push back against, but we'll get into that in a minute. I just want to say, on the surface, this is a team that will probably land somewhere pretty similar in the power rankings to last year's CLG, which had a total veteran composition. They had Broxa, they had Wild Turtle in there, all of these things. But the reason, as kind of a quick, too long didn't watch introduction to this, the reason that I'm so much higher on this than I am on what they did a year ago is that this lineup has a really, really strong chance and high potential to place the organization in a better spot a year from now than they were coming into this offseason. Coming into this offseason, they had to do a total reset, replace all their players, replace all their staff, and by the end of next year, I think they're going to have momentum, not another reset. So let's talk about these actual players. First of all, the best player on this team is going to be, I believe, their only import, Luger. If you haven't watched Academy or watched my content about Academy, you know that he was probably the leading candidate for the strongest individual performer in Academy throughout the year. Definitely up there. I would say the best bot laner. I think King kind of contested him at certain points, but especially with the nature of the teams around each of them, Luger is able to shine brighter. He's got really good individual skill. He came over from the Turkish league where he had been really good, spent the year in Academy after a little bit of delay getting in on a visa. He's a really skilled player. I believe the line that I've been carrying for the last few months is that I think he's a top 5 bot laner in the LCS, and now he's going to get a chance to prove it. And of course, hopefully the team context that he's in will allow him to shine enough to show that. Contracts will be probably a candidate up there for best player on the team as well. He's been a good player for quite a while. He's got a lot of good aggression and instincts that I appreciate. He knows what to do and which lanes to play through at which times, all those kinds of things, and has been kind of underrated, I think, for a few years. So, yeah, those two players, I think, a pretty good performance core. And then you have the 3 kind of journeyman, young players, young in the sense of inexperienced. I don't know their specific ages, but that's not really too important. You have Palafox in the mid lane, Jenkins in top, Poom in support. And all 3 of these, I think, are going to be low-end LCS players, kind of bottom third of the positional rankings, but they all have potential to climb higher than that. They can all be mid-tier LCS players throughout the year, next year, if they do well, if they high roll on their potential, right? And I think if any of them can pull a similar level of development to what Ablaze Olive did in this past year, where he overperformed my own expectations and kind of hit the higher end and is hitting the higher end of his potential, then that'll make the year a pretty huge success because you've got 2 players that you can believe in. These with Luger and Contracts, if you had 5 players, their quality, this could be, a top 4 or 5 team, very respectable. And if any of these players can grow into that level or even exceed that, that puts you in a great position a year from now. Palafox, of course, we know that he had been quite hyped by a lot of the community coming into this current year, and kind of didn't have the best year, didn't quite deliver on that. I think he does have pretty good potential. I was never quite as kind of bullish on him as I think a lot of the sentiment out there. But I do think that he can be, a mid-tier LCS player as his kind of high end that he can grow into. Jenkins, similar. I think, he ended up playing on Team Liquid. He ended up coming through looking really good as a fill-in, and maybe that's a little bit because you're filling in for Alphari. Everybody thinks you're doomed, and you do fine. And so that can lead to a lot of praise and deserved praise that he filled that role well, filling in for the most skilled top laner in the league. He did have a lot of help from the quality of the team around him and the style of the team around him. I think, when you have Core JJ roaming top so often and all these kinds of things, that can really help you to look good. But I'm not saying that Jenkins was, boosted or anything like that. I think he held his own. But I do think that my personal assessment of him, kind of a bottom third top laner who could overperform that and be mid-tier. And then Puma has had very little LCS opportunity before. These other guys have had half a split or a full split or almost a full year in the LCS. Puma had a few games 2 years ago, but then was kind of like set back to Academy for a year. He's got the existing relationship with Luger because they played it as a duo for most of the year. He's a domestic support, which is really rare in the last couple of years to find high quality potential there. And so that alone, I think, makes him really valuable to have in your organization to say, this is a bot lane that we think can work well together. And if it goes really well, we have, a mid-level domestic support. That's huge. That's super, super valuable for your organization. So if the Poom acquisition works out, that could just be a giant win. And it's worth taking a risk on, even if it has the potential to not work out. That's the nature of working with inexperienced players. So I think overall, these are a set of 5 players that could work out well, that set up the future nicely. From the macro view, now we'll talk about the whole buyouts thing a little bit. There are, unless some of these players might have been acquired with, a mutual agreement to release and move them on, orgs don't generally give up players for free if they can help it, but so 4 of these players would have been transferred with buyouts. I would have guessed that Luger in particular would have a relatively high buyout, it may be in the low to mid 6 figures kind of thing, like just based on total context of the market and the quality of a player that I see him as. But as an import, that means the demand for him wouldn't be as high, because if you're going to import a bot laner, why would you go for someone who's been in Academy when you could go for a Hansam or whatever, assuming you can afford them? Like, that's a bit of the mentality there that can drive down the price on Luger, compared to if he was a domestic player, which makes him a little bit more in demand and a little bit more valuable. So while I would have guessed initially coming into the offseason that there'd be a high buyout on Luger, from what I've heard, the buyout wasn't very significant. I don't have any numbers, and I probably wouldn't share them if I did, but I'm from what I understand, the buyout market on all 4 of these was pretty modest. I think the deals on these were good. CLG didn't come in and say we can't spend any money on buyouts, which is a good sign that they're willing to invest. But I don't think that they had to shell out really big for these guys. Another macro note alongside that, if there are 4 resident players, which they have, that adds some really good future flexibility for your roster. Whether that's mid-season, if you have to course correct, you have the option to bring in another import if that's, if the right opportunity is there. End of the year, again, you have only 1 import player to hold on to, and you're not going to have to do any really difficult, awkward shuffling there. So they built in what appears to be a financially responsible way, but not a rock bottom budget kind of a way. And they've built with good future flexibility with their import slots. So those are really good signs as well. And kudos to their new general manager, John McDaniel, on pulling that off and identifying the players he wanted that way as well. I want to add a quick comment on what would success look like for CLG in 2022. So I think there are a few things here. One, I think they need to compete respectably, right? They don't need to get top 4. They don't need to be contending for Worlds, although obviously that would be great. But if they can finish top 6, both splits, that's a win. If they can win a playoff series in the summer, that's a win as well. I think that's kind of the competitive line that I would target for with them. And of course, internally, you're going to set the highest goals you can, strive, reach, put some stretch goals. But as an outsider looking at a macro view of their season, that's kind of what I would put them. Another point of success would be if they kind of hit on at least one of Jenkins, Palafox, or Poom. If at least one of those guys proves we can be a mid-tier, we're hitting the higher end of our potential mid-tier LCS player that can move our program forward, and that can be, that as of 2023, you might have Luger contracts and one of those guys as a core, and then you can add in more players on top of that. That's also one as well. And of course, the more of them that you hit on, the more of them high roll, the better. But you don't need all 3 to be big successful pieces that you keep long term. Another point of success, and I've got 2 more here. One is they've got to build some momentum in their talent pipeline. So I don't know what they're doing in Academy yet, but I want to see some players there that can threaten to take over spots in summer or in 2023, and be kind of the options for whichever of these players low roll. I mean, contracts could also bomb. It's possible, or even Luger. and you want to have options there for force yourself into some hard decisions a year from now on who you're going to keep, who you're going to promote, things like that. So I want to see who they're putting in the academy level, and how that's all going to come together. That'll be part of the final assessment of their offseason. And then finally, I want to see a pretty decent content year, right? Build the right storylines of these players. Bring the fans along for the ride of where you're actually headed, what your goals are, and what you're trying to achieve. Get them connected to the players, especially I would say to Contracts and Luger, since those are the highest chances to be longer term pieces for you. But of course, all of them, right? Tell the story as a whole of where you're going. And that's obviously just something every team wants to achieve, but it's, I think, especially important for CLG right now as rebuilding their brand and their fan base and their connection. So on the whole, again, pretty happy with what CLG have done here, and from what I understand, the way they've done it. Congrats to their staff, to Greg Kim, John McDaniel, the coaching staff, on putting this together, and best of luck to them as they try to round it out and get started to compete next year.